What's up, everyone? This is Justin Kahn. Welcome to my podcast, The Quest, where I dive into the ups and downs of trailblazers around me to help you figure out life and where you want to be. Before we start, bang that subscribe button for unfiltered conversations on tech, wellness, and entertainment dropping every Tuesday. Today, my conversation is with Odunayo Eweniyi, who is the COO and co-founder of PiggyVest. Love my conversation with Odunayo. She has a tremendously brave founding story, went through a lot. We talked about patience. We talked about all the trials and tribulations of being a founder. And I'm really excited to bring you this conversation. All right, here it is. Odunayo, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Can we start by just talking about your background, like where you came from? I usually ask people, what's their origin story? Where did you come from?
Yeah, well, I'm Nigerian. So I was born in Nigeria, and I've lived here most of my life. Both my parents are university professors. My dad was a professor and he taught psychology and philosophy. And then my mom is a professor of early childhood education and sociology. So I grew up in a very academic household. And so we were very reading and academically inclined and not too much playing. And it was very interesting that this is kind of where I ended up as an entrepreneur, because it was not expected at all. We lived a very structured upbringing. It was fun, but we always kind of knew what the next steps were and what the next plans were. And then after graduation from university, I met up with my friends, ironically on the way back from a job interview. And that's kind of how I got started on my entrepreneurship journey and abandoned my plans for a master's degree and, all the other related straight path things.
How did your parents react to that? I can imagine they're both professors. Were they shocked that you wanted to become an entrepreneur?
Well, shock is one thing. They were shocked. They were annoyed. There was a bit of yelling. But, it's something when your mind is made up and you just won't change it. For some reason, and I really can't even explain why, I was determined to try the entire startup thing. So they couldn't change my mind. And so it took them maybe 2 years, but then they became okay with it.
Awesome. So what drove you to want to start a startup?
I think it's a mixture of things. And our upbringing was a very big part of that. When we were growing up, my dad used to answer our problems in quotes. So if you asked him, oh, this happened at school, my dad is going to be like, oh, that happened. So what are you going to do about it? And then he would make us go find solutions, and then help us refine it. Or you tell him, oh, I read this thing in the news today, and my dad would tell you to remember that no one is coming and you are the only one who can save yourself. And he used to say all these things. And I don't think that they were aware of how much they were ingraining in us that we had to go out and solve problems. But when I graduated university, I did a couple of interviews. And what was immediately obvious to me was that graduating top of your class in computer engineering with a first class degree doesn't matter in Nigeria's job market, right? It just didn't. You had to know somebody, and I did not. And so I came back from that job interview and I was walking, and my friend, who I didn't know lived in the same housing estate as I did, kind of leaned out of a window and called it. I was like, Odunayo, come inside. And I went inside, and they told me that they were building a loyalty and discount card startup. And I asked, can I join you guys? I don't have any reason for asking that. I just did. And they said yes. And so I joined them, and I worked with them as a social media manager and then as an ops person. And 3 months into that, the person who called me was talking about he's building a platform that helps people put together their CV properly. And I'm like, oh, I know how to write CVs. And then I joined him. And that's how I became the co-founder of my first startup.
So you just, that was it. You just thought, I'm just going to do it. And there was I guess you had an entrepreneurial drive to just go try something new.
Yeah, I don't want to say I had a drive, but there was something that was very compelling about taking all of these the processes into your own hands and just creating them. And in hindsight, it was probably I don't think that I'm going to get a job in this market. And if I can't, and I have like incredible results, other people who do and don't know anybody who won't as well. If this has a tiny chance of fixing it, we should try. And so I did. And, it wasn't making any money or anything, but I thought it was worth it to try and not give it up in the middle and go for a master's degree. And the point I made to that my parents then was, look, my result is my result. If I decide to go for a master's next year, I still have my certificate and I can probably go for it. They disagreed, but that was kind of my justification.
I love that. There's something in there where it's, oftentimes people wait to start a startup until it becomes harder and harder over time. Like when you're young, I started my first company too when I was 21 years old. I didn't have any job prospects really. And it was just kind of like, hey, let's just do it as an experiment, because we had no costs and it was really easy to just try something.
Yeah.
And it's always easier then. So when oftentimes people ask like, oh, should I work at a big company first or something? And it's kind of like, well, maybe so to get some skills, but it's, you want to take the leap before it's too late,
Yeah, I agree. Because I was 19 and my mom was like, what do you know about running a company? I'm like, nothing, but yeah, who cares?
Okay. So one thing I want to know is, how did you persist? I've been through these periods where I was working on all these different ideas. None of them worked like I wanted. And I always wanted to give up, how did you keep going and like say, okay, we're going to like keep trying things?
That's a very interesting question. We had like so many times where we had like, okay, this is not working. And one of the things that like my dad also used to tell me when I was growing up, he had like many quotes, was like to not take failure personally. And so, for instance, when I was in secondary school, I would pass all the subjects and I would fail fine arts just because I never like figured out how to draw. Till now, I'm really horrible at it. And I always used to like be very down because I like have all A's and then the credits in fine arts, or sometimes a pass because I was really terrible. And it went on till university. I was terrible. I studied engineering, but I was really bad at technical drawing. And so I would come home and I would really be bitter about it. And my dad would tell me that, this has no reflection on you as a person. It just means you're not an artist. And so every time something would fail, I would call him and I would explain to him, and then he would ask me, so why do you think it failed? And so he would send me on a journey of kind of reflecting on what was my fault? What are the things I could not control? And how can we make it better the next venture around? So I realized that I kept telling myself, you can't stop moving. I don't have a choice anymore. But 2 years into like the entire startup journey, I'd lost my master's admission. So it was this or get a job and like find some money to, and I was supposed to be on scholarship. So I was going to have to find money to go for the schooling thing. And I can say that I was certifiably ruined for a 9-to-5 corporate job. I really enjoyed the startup life and the flexibility it gave. And so I would call my dad and he would say, I think you can do it. Like, I don't agree with it, but I think you can do it. I think that a support system is really important. And kind of the understanding that you cannot, you have to internalize failure, but you can never personalize it. That's like where the damage begins. So you internalize it, you dissect it. What lessons can you take from this? What are the things that you could have done better? But at the end of the day, you have to understand that, this failed, but Odunayo is not a failure. And it's usually a bit of a journey, I have to admit. Sometimes it's just really hard to kind of separate both. But when you do, you kind of find the strength to keep moving.
I love that. That's awesome. So, okay, then you came up with the idea for PiggyVest.
We came up with the idea for PiggyVest at the lowest point for free CV in December of 2015. So we done this thing that probably all young startup founders do. We overhired. We raised some money for free CV. And then, we hired many people and we had an office and we had 30 people in the office and we're paying them. And, we didn't pay attention to the bottom line until it was too late. So by December of 2015, we were on our last 2 million naira. And so going home for Christmas then was not like a happy occasion. So we were we're going back thinking, how exactly are we going to make next year work? And it was I wasn't sure. That was the point when I was close to calling my parents and telling them, okay, you win. How do we move from here? But I didn't have to make that call, thankfully, because on December 31st, we were on Twitter. We're all kind of heavy Twitter users. And there was a lady here in Nigeria who had saved 1,000 naira in a wooden box. And she had saved it daily for the entire year. So that day she broke it, she took photos, and she had 365,000 naira in the box. And the tweet went viral. Everyone was like, on Twitter, everyone was like, oh, I'm getting a box next year. I'm getting a box next year. But like something interesting was going on in our group chat. My co-founder, Joshua, brought that tweet to the group chat and said, guys, what if we built a digital version of this? And we had a back and forth both on Twitter and inside the group chat. And our other co-founder, who's the technical one, said, okay, that he's going to try to build it. And 2 weeks after, by the middle of January 2016, we had an MVP version of PiggyVest. And that's kind of how the entire journey started.
That's amazing. And tell me, what were the things, kind of notable times in your startup that you remember so far? Were there tough times after that, like after that initial, kind of getting it launched?
Yeah. So we always face tough times with PiggyVest because it's financial, and a very, very important currency in this particular space is trust, user trust. And every time something happens that's not even to us, we're somehow affected because like Nigeria is a very low trust environment and people still don't particularly trust digital services. So a lot of the times it would be the CBN released this regulation and people haven't even read it. They don't know what it is about, but all of a sudden just assume that, oh, this is definitely going to affect Piggy Bank. And they're like, oh yeah, is this going to affect Piggy Bank? Am I going to have to remove my money? All of a sudden we start trending, people start getting scared, and you are in PR crisis mode. Happens all the time, including this most recent ban on cryptocurrency that has nothing to do with us, but somehow we were trending for 2 days. And it was just like, guys, we're not even a crypto company. And so it's things like that. It's usually like just trying to find a balance of that, trust and reputation is year in, year out, probably the hardest thing.
How have you dealt with that? How have you kept calm actually for yourself during those times? Because I can imagine it's almost like getting hit by a bus. You just wake up and then all of a sudden you're trending on Twitter that for something that has nothing to do with your company and people are super upset or scared. How do you stay calm in those times?
Well, I don't stay calm. I just learn to project calm. Inside my head is a mess. I'm like, what do we do? What do we do? But you have to, because I don't think it serves anybody for the co-founder of the company to be as jittery as the users. So while inside my head is all over the place, and I'm wondering, what do we do? How do we respond? What would be the best way to put out a statement? Outside is just, okay, we will be back soon. We're working on fixing this. A particularly good example would be last month. There was a flurry of things in the fintech space here. The central bank put a ban on cryptocurrency trading as it relates to the banking sector. And 2 days after that, one of the major providers of virtual account numbers in Nigeria shut down the service. And we're probably the biggest we're the biggest savings and investment fintech company in Nigeria. And so we have the most people with those virtual account numbers. And that represents, and it happened on a Sunday morning. No one was expecting it. It was I thought it was going to be a good day. And all of a sudden, they released that statement, and all the mails had gone out to the public before we got it at the same time as everybody using the platform. And so it became a whole thing. And the headlines were, the way journalism works these days, it's X shuts down PiggyVest account numbers. There was zero context as to the actual thing that was happening. So we woke up and all of us, the entire company, had to be on crisis mode. And we were preparing the statement, and at the same time, we're working on a solution as well. And this is where I suppose the value of partnerships come in, because one of the things that we wanted to do was tell people, truly the virtual accounts have been deactivated, but we will be back with new virtual accounts for you on or before Wednesday. But one of our other friends, who's also a founder, messaged me on WhatsApp, and he's like, oh, I can provide virtual account numbers for you guys right now if your tech team can integrate ASAP. And as it turns out, they could. So what happened then was, while the internet was melting down and we had to turn our personal accounts into like official accounts as well. PiggyVest was tweeting. I was tweeting from my personal account. My co-founders were tweeting from their personal accounts. People who work in customer service were tweeting from both, they're like answering the live chats and tweeting from their personal accounts to reassure people. But luckily for us, 2 hours after that happened, we were able to generate new virtual account numbers for people and kind of turn the situation around. I could tell you, like, after that, I just kind of went to sleep for the rest of the day. But it was like probably the toughest 6 hours, because it was like, what's going, and the blogs had already carried it. So after doing the new virtual accounts, we had to then like settle down to start sending DMCA notices to people like, this is not correct, take it down or correct it. The trust balancing thing is really hard for fintechs in Africa. I don't think fundraising is hard. Partnerships are hard. Regulation is hard. Maintaining the trust of close to 3 million people, probably the hardest thing.
That's interesting. It feels like, in a way, that you're kind of fighting this uphill battle on trust. So tell me about like how some of the, obviously you've gone through a lot and it's been tough at times, but tell me about how it's become successful in the last, 5 years since you started PiggyVest.
Oh, I think that a lot of the success would be owed for the most part to the people who use the platform. Because I say that we didn't set out intentionally to build, a referral system. They indicated it for us and we kind of just followed their lead. And from then on, having followed their lead onto, we should, create this tone of voice because this is what resonates with people. We should create a good experience because they'll talk about like the customer service and the experience on the app anyway. A referral system because these people are the best marketers of the product. So we, after discovering that people would talk about their experience on the platform, we decided to invest in building a referral system like into the platform where you as an active user have a unique link. It's pretty common everywhere. It just wasn't as used here for some reason. And then, you'd go out there and you bring someone else onto the platform. But the difference is, it's not just that person signing up. It's that person signing up and going through 5 different steps in the platform, and then you get rewarded. And so people really take it as, I'm signing you up and I'm teaching you how to use the platform. And a very intended consequence of that is that you form a community of people who are very protective of the product. So, when we started, it was just a savings app that was helping people save daily, weekly, monthly. A few months into it, we had users asking us, so what are people that don't receive salaries? What are people whose like incomes are infrequent? How do you want to help them? And so we built a feature for that. And then, they asked us, treasury bills are too low and, they are too prohibitive. One of the interesting things about the Nigerian financial system then was people who made less than 100K didn't have a chance to invest because the minimum buying amounts for investment opportunities in Nigeria was really high and people's average monthly salaries are really low. So they were like, you guys should be able to build something like that. And so we built a democratized savings feature where people could lock as low as 1,000 naira, which is just about $2.50, and get very competitive interest rates as people who were out there locking in $20,000. So the users continued to guide us on this is the next thing we want to see. So PiggyVest is built on the back of listening to the users and then creating features and products that are accessible and affordable to people like us. And so that's kind of how we've been able to maintain success.
All right. I hope you guys are enjoying the conversation so far. On this podcast, I always talk about practicing gratitude. And today, I'm really thankful for our sponsor, Cash App, in making the quest possible. Cash App is the best way to spend, save, invest in stocks, and buy cryptocurrency in a way that's easy to understand and accessible to everyone. From payments, banking, investing, you can do it all on one platform. It's available for download on the App Store and Google Play. So you better go get that $10 your friend owes you from 2 years ago. Now, where were we? Tell me, one of the questions I love to ask is about founders' personal growth. Because for me, starting as a company was this tremendous growth vehicle for my own learning and self-improvement about myself. I think that I couldn't have gotten anywhere else. I like to tell people I spent, tens of millions of dollars on my own business school and education, and so
Yep.
what has your education been like in your startup?
Oh, wow. I think it's completely changed like a lot about who I am, right? And how I'd approach situations. I'm a lot less impulsive, and more driven to like research. It's like attending business school several times over, sometimes flunking out, sometimes going back. You pick up a lot of tips and tricks along the way, and then you become like a meld of all of these experiences, right? Like I studied computer engineering, and in 2016 I found myself building a financial company, which meant I had to get ready for that. So I've gone halfway through a master's degree in finance and banking. I hope to finish. I don't know if I will. I've taken I don't know how many edX and Coursera courses. I'm on Google constantly. And that's another thing that I've learned is it's not a terrible thing to not know. You just don't, and then you just go
That's
find
a really
out.
important one.
So yeah. So, I say I don't know, like, I don't know. It used to be something that I was like, I don't like not to know things. But on this journey, you can't know everything is impossible, and you cannot be ashamed of that. So, you kind of own it, and then you go find out. And then you go find out again, you learn again, you unlearn some things that are wrong. And then I had to reshape what I like thought was leadership and kind of figure out what does work for the people who work with us. So it's been a whole thing. It's like a human being going into, I don't know, a molding machine and coming out in a different shape.
Say more about the leadership side. I'm curious how your leadership style has evolved.
That's actually almost the same as who I was before 2018. I would give instructions, and when it wasn't done well, I just go ahead and do it myself, and all of those things. And then, we were in the Google Launchpad program, and then there's this thing they do where they send anonymous feedback forms to people who work with you, and those people have to send like the results back. And we were reading it, and it was kind of hard to take in. People saying you micromanage when you think that you're just like asking for feedback. People saying, you're not like providing an avenue for them to grow when you think that you're just helping out and like trying to work on things faster. So it was really hard not to take it personally, but then, we learned not to. And then, there was a lot of positive things there to build upon. So we just kind of went from the angle of how about we build upon the good things and then start to learn the difficult ones. So now I think I'm more comfortable with asking people to go do it again, try it a different way. I'm more okay with people not doing things the exact way that I would have done it. That terrifies me, I'll say. But you kind of have to be okay with it. And it's more than not, it ends up very well actually. And having different styles in the company has kind of made us the better for it. I was always afraid of, they're going to mess it up if they do it this way. But it turns out if you kind of just stand back, people will learn from their mistakes. And so a lot of those things has just been around allowing people to grow into the role that you've hired them for because they're smart. And also understanding that I myself didn't come fully formed. I kind of had to learn. So let people learn.
I love that. There's two interesting things, super interesting things in there that I want to point out. One is like if there's a surrender that you have to accept when you're, as a founder, when you get to a certain stage, or really anyone in life. But I think especially you're forced to as a founder where, a lot of us want control over what's happening and the feeling of control. And at a certain point, if you want your team to be able to flourish and grow, they need to be able to have the control. And you have to say, okay, I'm going to let you do it even the way I wouldn't want to do it. I wouldn't, because that's how you learn and have agency and ownership. And that was super hard for me to accept, like even today, it's like I have like a little, when someone's going to do something that I'm like, I don't know if I want to, I would do it that way. There's like a little bit of clench, and then you're like, okay, I'm just going to relax. And like, I could tell. Before it was subconscious, I would just be like, no, don't do it that way. And now it's like, okay, I like know the feeling, and I know intellectually I don't want to bow into that feeling. So I'm just going to like focus and like let it go. that was one thing. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is your 360 review that you got from Google. Having anonymous feedback from the people who work directly with you. If people, a lot of my listeners probably haven't heard of that, but there's this concept of a 360 review, which is really super important for anybody. Oftentimes it's in the workplace, but it can also be in the context of like your life. But just getting somebody who's like a neutral third party to be able to collect really candid, anonymous feedback from the people around you, you will learn so much about yourself. Like, even though it's so hard. I had this experience where I did a 360 review for my last company, Atrium, and my executive team all filled it out. And my coach had collected, he actually did the interviews. It wasn't just a survey. He like interviewed them in person and then aggregated the feedback so it was anonymized. And then we went over it in front of the whole executive team. I went over it with them, and it was very brutal. Like, people were like, Justin doesn't care. I feel like he's just using us and he doesn't care about us. Or I feel that, he's unfair. He's creating these like different unfair situations. And I was like, I thought I was good with it. But then when we were going through the situation, I was like, oh my God, like I started being defensive, because I was like, no, that's not a fair interpretation. Like, that's not how I felt, or that's not what I was trying to do. But then it was interesting because it was a moment, a really teachable moment for me. That my coach paused. He was like, okay, it's not safe to give him feedback. He's not like accepting this feedback. And then we went outside and he was like, you have to go, you're like triggered, right? You're angry right now. Your amygdala is firing and you're really angry. You got to go do something to calm down. So like scream and shout, jump up and down, do some push-ups, run up the driveway. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm like, I'm not fucking angry. I'm fine. In the most angry voice possible. And then, so my coach, Matt Mochari, who's a legend, he's amazing. He just starts running up the driveway and he's like, you can't catch me. And he's 10 years older than me and probably at least 50 pounds heavier than I am. So I was like, what? No way. And I just start sprinting after him. And he actually almost beat me. And so I'm like really trying, and then at the end of the run, he starts screaming. He's like yelling. He's like, ah, and he's like, so I started yelling. And at the end, we go like 100 yards or something. And then I'm like, oh, okay. I like let it out. I like kind of got the energy out. And so then we went back into the room and I was able to hear the feedback and really understand what people were saying. They weren't necessarily, their experience, no matter what it was valid. That was how they interpreted my actions. And that was like such an eye opener for me as a leader,
I mean, but you have to be ready to like understand the feedback. It's really tough.
It's probably one of the hardest work things that I've ever done, because it's so easy to feel like, oh, they're attacked. I'm being attacked.
Yeah.
And I was misinterpreted or whatever, Cool. Well, I'd love to talk about some of your other endeavors, because it sounds like every good entrepreneur, you like to do many different things. And I know you've started an angel fund called First Check Africa, and then also a organization called the Feminist Coalition. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about some of the other projects you're working on.
Right. When I started in tech in 2013, I was very young, I think, and one of the things that helped me, first of all, were my co-founders who I'd known for a while. And then we met this really cool angel investor very early on. And so he kind of went ahead of us every time and made the way kind of smoother. But an important part was that at that time, I could count how many women were actively in the tech space. And in 2016, it was better, but I could still count them. Now it's better now, and like there's way more people, but we're still not enough. And every time you ask, VCs or accelerator programs, why are there not more women here? They either get defensive or they say there are not like enough women to actually fund. And I'm like, is that so? Like, I was at an accelerator program and I was speaking, and I looked around the room and I realized I was speaking to an all-male room. And I asked the coordinator, like, why are there no more women here? And his answer was, this is deep tech. And so I'm like, so what does that mean? Like, what does this is deep tech mean? And he says, women don't like this one. or maybe he said it was hard for women or something like that. And I'm like, but you invited a woman to speak. And then he says something that alludes to, oh, you are different. And I really hated that because the concept of me being different than the rest of women is just not true. And that also got me thinking that the line about there not being enough women to fund is also not true. Because a lot of like funding is done via like this weird heuristic where everyone funds people who look like them or sound like them or approach things the way they would approach it, or people like to say this nonsense about a fund who you would get a beer with or something like that. I think that's ridiculous. Sometimes you don't get a beer with a person just because they don't want to, and that's fine. That doesn't mean they won't build a good product. But that always means that the pipeline gets narrower, like for women as you go. People will make intros for fellow men, but that's women are not as lucky. And so by the time you get to from pre-seed to seed stage, you're like finding one woman in 10. Because the people who are willing to take a risk on you at the very early stage, like our angel investor took a risk on us when we weren't even sure where Push City was going. He gave us 25K. I was just like, yeah, go crazy. No one does that at scale for women. Like it just doesn't happen. And so I thought we're not asking, people to fund put money in the fund right now, but I've gone ahead and I've been luckier than most women because I've spoken to them, right? And so there's an innate instinct to pay it back, right, in a way that I can. So, and it's also experimental in that the question that I want to answer for myself is it true that there is not enough women to fund? If it turns out that it's true, I'll admit it and, move on. But I don't think so. I think that if you are able to go even before pre-seed and kind of find women who are at the very, very early stage of starting like tech companies and working on these ideas before they give up because pre-seed is too hard to raise or seed stage is too hard to raise, I think that we could significantly improve the number of women that like pass through the funding pipeline in Nigeria first and then in the rest of Africa. And that's kind of what First Check is about.
It's a great mission.
Yeah.
We'll
see.
Well, so yeah, how are you investing now?
So yeah, we've started looking at companies. We had in the first month we had like submissions from all over like the continent, and so now we started scheduling calls and speaking to startups, and we should hopefully make our first investment in the first half of this year. We have to get it right, so that's very important.
I love that. So what are the lessons in investing in Africa or startups in Africa? So I've invested in some African companies, including like Paystack, which just was acquired by
Congrats.
Stripe. Thank you. Yes, they were in my group at Y Combinator, and
okay.
I was a really big fan of Shola, the founder there, and so obviously that worked out really well. I'm curious. I've never actually been to Africa, though. I have to admit, it's on my high on the list, and I'm curious, what do you think the opportunities are in the investment side, on the tech side?
Well, the first thing is that fintech is like going insane right now in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Like, from payment, Flutterwave became a unicorn and everyone's just like lost it. There's products coming out every day. There's products getting into Y Combinator every day. And so I'll say that like as of right now, probably the biggest sector of Nigeria's tech ecosystem, and Africa's actually, is financial technology. So there's a lot going on there. And then as really close runner-ups, there's clean energy, and then there's health. But I suppose the most important thing to know about investing in Africa, kind of like when you invested in Paystack, is understanding that our problems are very, very different than the problems in the West, and does require investors that are, first of all, open-minded. Everyone says open-mindedness, but like you really need it here because, a typical founder is not just trying to run a company. He's running his company and he's 80% responsible for providing his own infrastructure. And, a lot of the time when you're building a company in the West, even if you look at a place like South Africa, you're building an existing infrastructure. But here, you're going to have to build what you need, right? And I'm not talking about like just the financial like rails that you need to build upon. We have to provide our own electricity, transport, internet, all of those things are a bit broken here. And so there's that journey to fix it while also building the product that the investor has invested in. So our challenges are a bit different. Regulation works a bit differently here. We require loads of patience. kind of like to navigate it and kind of make a success of whatever you're building here. So and the interesting thing though is that those challenges are also the opportunities that like lie here, because like Paystack, like Flutterwave, like all the other companies that have gone before, figuring out solutions to those big problems is the opportunity. Right? Flutterwave built $1 billion company out of fixing problems of payment from across Africa. Paystack's done the same for merchants in Nigeria. Like all of the problems that we outline as, oh, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, the startups that go on to fix it, and startups that will make you money.
That's a difficult challenge. I mean, it sounds daunting, right? But oftentimes the best companies come from like the hardest grinds, because like it's hard to compete. It's hard for
Yeah.
I love that. Something that we always talked about at Y Combinator about Stripe. Stripe is like such a slog of a company to create in the beginning, but obviously then that's what bakes it into something great. Cool. Well, we usually finish up with a couple questions from our Discord server. Habiba, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you so much for being here today. First off, it's actually something that I think a lot of people come across this problem. When you're doing so much, and I could see evidently that you're doing so much at once, and with the whole thing about women empowerment, you do things on the side of your main business. And I feel like a lot of the time it's very easy for us to get so overwhelmed and to easily burn out and become less productive. How do you manage that?
I think that the first thing to understand is I don't think there's anyone who can manage doing too many things at the same time very well. You will always drop the ball on some things, and you kind of have to be okay with that. So that's the first thing, is understand that you're not going to be able to juggle all of them perfectly constantly. Some things will fall by the wayside. You apologize for them, you fix it, and then you move on again. So the spirit of trying to do too many things at the same time, or doing a lot of things at the same time, is understanding that you're also human. Sometimes you take a step back. I've had entire weeks where I've gone like, my brain had like shut down and I just couldn't be productive. So I just sat in my room in the dark and watched TV shows, right? And then you come back, you make up for lost time, and then you keep going again, right? Sometimes you realize, I can't balance too many things. So you drop some. And that's also okay. Again, you're just one person. You have many interests, but you only have, so much time, so much energy, so much concentration, so much anything. So the key is self-awareness, right? How much can you actually humanly do? And when you can't, are you self-aware enough to like admit to yourself that you can't? Do you drop it? And, do you listen to yourself enough to know when you're tired? Burnout is a real thing, and I've experienced it, and I've taken steps. Like I was just like, okay, you know what? I need to take like some time away from all of this work and kind of recalibrate and figure out, what do I want to continue to do? So there is no science to it, unfortunately. There is just art of listening to yourself, the art of understanding what your own limits as a person are, and it differs for every different person. I can balance 4 things, 5 things at the same time, and some people can only do one. That doesn't mean, that I'm better than them. It just means that I can stretch a little more, and, we will all achieve success in very different ways. So it's really about who you are, how much you listen to yourself, and how much you know yourself.
I love this conversation. Odunayo. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This is great.
My pleasure.
All right. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Odunayo. She's a reminder of the world that you don't need to be a tech bro from Silicon Valley to be a successful founder. You just need the right vision, unflinching determination, and a strong heart. Shout out to Habiba, our Quest fellow for the episode, who asked some great questions. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to drop us a rating, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out all Quest-related content at listen.justin.quest. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. Take care of each other, and I'll see you next week.